The stories behind creepy urban legends, real or fake. What if the hitchhiker you picked up wasn't alive? What if they led you straight into the jaws of a nightmare? Tonight, we're delving into a tale that may leave you reconsidering those late-night drives in the woods. The legend of the Melon Heads spans 3 states, Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut, each with its own sinister twist. These small, humanoid creatures with grotesquely enlarged heads are said to haunt the outskirts of civilization, lurking in dense forests or abandoned buildings. Some say they were once children, victims of cruel experiments gone horribly wrong. Others believe they're the twisted offspring of inbreeding in secluded backwoods communities. Wherever the truth lies, one thing is certain. The stories of encounters with the Melon Heads are deeply unsettling, and one account, in particular, stands out. It was a crisp autumn night in 2007 when Erin, a college sophomore from Ohio, found herself driving through the winding roads of Kirtland. She'd been visiting a friend and was now heading back to campus, her car slicing through the thick fog that blanketed the countryside. As her headlights illuminated the gnarled trees lining the road, Erin noticed something peculiar. A lone figure standing by the shoulder, their arm outstretched in a hitchhiking gesture. Against her better judgment, Erin slowed her car. The figure stepped closer, revealing a boy who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. His oversized hoodie hung awkwardly on his thin frame, and as he climbed into the passenger seat, Erin couldn't help but notice how his head seemed unnaturally large, almost swollen. "Where are you headed?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The boy muttered something about a cabin up the road, and fell silent. Erin's unease grew as she drove, the boy's presence feeling more and more oppressive. He sat stiffly, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but she could see his wide, unblinking eyes watching her. After several minutes of tense silence, the boy suddenly pointed to a narrow dirt path veering off the main road. "Turn here," he said in a flat voice. Erin hesitated but complied, the car's tires crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. The path grew narrower, the trees pressing in on either side. Her heart raced as she realized she had no idea where she was. The boy's demeanor shifted. He began to fidget, his breathing growing ragged. "They don't like strangers," he whispered. Erin's stomach dropped. "Who doesn't like strangers?" she asked, her voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Suddenly the path ended in a clearing, and Erin's headlights illuminated an old, dilapidated house. The windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged under the weight of time. The boy turned to her, his face now fully visible. His head was grotesquely misshapen, the skin stretched tight over bulging bones. Before Erin could react, he opened the door and bolted toward the house, disappearing into the darkness. Panic surged through Erin. She threw the car into reverse, but as she did, figures emerged from the trees. They were small, no taller than the children, but their heads were oversized and misshapen, just like the boys. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs jerking at odd angles. One of them slammed a hand against her window, its pale, veiny skin glistening in the headlights. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing sharp, uneven teeth. Erin floored the gas pedal, the car lurching backward. She managed to turn around and sped back down the path, her heart pounding in her ears. The figures didn't follow, but their image was seared into her mind. When she finally reached the main road, she didn't stop until she was back in the safety of her dorm room. The next day, she tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a prank, she thought, or her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down she knew what she had seen, and she wasn't the only one. The legend of the Melon Heads has persisted for decades, with sightings reported in all 3 states. In Ohio, they're said to inhabit the woods near Kirtland, the result of experiments by a deranged doctor, known as Dr. Crow. In Michigan, the legends point to the Lemp Mansion where they supposedly escaped from an asylum, and in Connecticut, they're tied to the abandoned Fairfield Hills Hospital. Skeptics argue that the Melon Heads are nothing more than an urban legend, a cautionary tale to keep people from venturing into dangerous remote areas. Others suggest that the stories could be rooted in real events, such as cases of hydrocephalus or other medical conditions that might explain their appearance. But for those who claim to have seen them, the Melon Heads are far from fictional. Erin's story is just one of many, and whether you believe it or not, one thing is certain. The woods hold secrets we may never fully understand. So the next time you find yourself driving down a lonely road and you see a figure standing by the side, think twice before you stop, because you never know who or what might be waiting for you. What if the cries of a lost child in the middle of the wilderness weren't cries for help, but a trap? Imagine hearing your name being called, a familiar voice in the distance. But when you turn around, no one's there. That's the chilling reality of the Kushtaka, the shape-shifting creatures from Alaska's Tlingit folklore who have haunted the icy wilderness for centuries. The Tlingit people of southeast Alaska have long spoken of the Kushtaka, part human, part otter beings, that roam the frigid waterways and dense forests. Their name roughly translates to land Otter Man, and while their motives remain shrouded in mystery, one thing is clear. Encountering a Kushtaka can be deadly. According to legend, these creatures lure unsuspecting victims by mimicking the cries of women and children, drawing them deeper into the wilderness or toward icy rivers. Once their prey is isolated, the Kushtaka strikes. Whether they're guardians of the wild or malicious tricksters depends on who's telling the tale, but one thing is certain: the Kushtaka thrive in Alaska's untamed isolation. It was the summer of 1978 when a fisherman named David Phelps took his small skiff out to the Chilkat River near Haines, Alaska. David, a seasoned outdoorsman, was familiar with the legends but dismissed them as mere stories to scare tourists. He had grown up hearing his grandparents' warnings about the Kushtaka, but he never gave them much thought. That night, the river was eerily quiet, the usual rustling of animals replaced by an oppressive stillness. As David set his net, a faint, muffled cry reached his ears. "Help me!" It was a woman's voice, trembling and desperate. His heart raced. Looking around, he saw no one. The cry came again, this time louder, as if it were just beyond the tree line. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty expanse. Grabbing a flashlight, David stepped off his boat and onto the riverbank, scanning the trees. He felt a knot in his stomach, the kind of primal dread that comes when something's not quite right. The cries grew fainter as he moved toward the woods. Then they stopped entirely. David's breath hung in the icy air as he stood in silence. The only sound, the faint lapping of water against the shore. He turned to head back to his boat when he heard it. His name, David. The voice was soft, almost familiar, but distorted, as though it were being spoken underwater. He froze, his flashlight flickered, and in its beam he saw movement. A shadow darting between the trees. He called out again, but the only response was laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. Panicking, David sprinted back to his skiff. As he shoved off from the bank, he glanced over his shoulder and saw them. A pair of glowing eyes reflecting the light from his lantern. Standing at the water's edge was a figure, its form shifting and rippling like water. One moment, it looked like an otter. The next, it was vaguely human, but its face was twisted into a horrifying grin, rows of sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight. The creature let out a piercing wail, and suddenly the water around his boat began to churn violently. David paddled with all his strength, his hands trembling as he tried to keep his skiff upright. The cries of women and children echoed all around him, coming from every direction. It felt as though the river itself were alive, pulling him toward the icy depths. Somehow, David made it back to shore downstream, his boat battered and half submerged. He never fished the Chilkat River again and refused to speak of what he'd seen for years. When he finally shared his story, another local, Sarah Jenkins, spoke up. Sarah recounted a similar experience from her childhood when she and her brother had heard cries in the woods during a camping trip. Her brother went to investigate and was never seen again. Sarah described the same glowing eyes and the eerie mimicry of voices she recognized. "It's like they knew exactly what to say to lure you in," she said. "But when you get close, you realize it's not human." So what might explain David's and Sarah's harrowing encounters? Skeptics argue that stories of the Kushtaka stem from the dangers of Alaska's wilderness. The cries attributed to the creatures could be explained by natural phenomena, like the calls of certain birds or the eerie acoustics of the forest. Others point to the effects of isolation and hypothermia, which can cause auditory and visual hallucinations. But for the Tlingit people, the Kushtaka are much more than folklore. They serve as both a warning and a protector. In some versions of the legend, the Kushtaka guide lost travelers to safety, transforming them into one of their own to save them from freezing to death. In others, they're sinister tricksters, preying on human vulnerability. Could David's and Sarah's experiences have been vivid hallucinations, brought on by exhaustion and the unforgiving environment? Or did they truly encounter one of Alaska's most feared cryptids? Whatever the truth may be, the legend of the Kushtaka endures, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in the wilderness. So the next time you hear a cry for help in the woods, ask yourself, is it someone in need or something far more dangerous? What if the home you lived in wasn't just haunted by one spirit, but an entire family of them? Tonight, we're uncovering the chilling story of the Lemp Mansion, a place so steeped in tragedy, it's said the walls themselves weep. In St. Louis, Missouri, the Lemp Mansion is a towering reminder of the once prosperous Lemp family and their devastating downfall. Built in the 1860s, the mansion was home to the family that controlled one of America's largest breweries at the time. But behind their wealth and influence lay a string of tragedies that would leave their legacy forever tainted. Today, the mansion is a hotspot for paranormal activity, with countless reports of eerie noises, shadowy apparitions, and a suffocating sense of despair that grips anyone who dares to enter. But is the mansion truly haunted, or is its dark history simply playing tricks on those who visit? Our story begins in the late 1800s, at the height of the Lemp family's success. William J. Lemp had transformed the family brewery into a thriving empire, making their beer a household name across America. The Lemp Mansion was a symbol of their prosperity, filled with opulent furnishings, grand parties, and the laughter of children. But that laughter would soon be silenced. In 1901, William's eldest son, Frederick, the heir to the brewery, died suddenly at just 28 years old. His death shattered William, who would take his own life 3 years later, shooting himself in the head in the very mansion he had built. His widow, Julia, and their remaining children were left to pick up the pieces. But the curse of the Lemp family didn't end there. Over the next several decades, tragedy after tragedy struck. Another son, William Jr., took over the brewery but faced financial ruin during Prohibition. Despondent, he too ended his life in the mansion, shooting himself in what is now the dining room. The youngest son, Charles, would later move into the mansion, living in isolation with only his dog for company. In 1949, Charles ended his life as well, leaving a note that simply read, "In case I am found dead, blame it on no one but me." By the mid-20th century, the mansion was abandoned, a crumbling relic of the Lemp family's once grand legacy. And that's when the hauntings began. Visitors to the mansion have reported chilling encounters over the years. Employees at the mansion, which now operates as a restaurant and inn, tell of hearing disembodied voices and footsteps echoing through the halls. Glasses have been known to shatter on their own, and doors open and close as if moved by unseen hands. Guests staying overnight often wake up to the feeling of being watched, or hear faint sobbing in the dead of night. One of the most infamous apparitions is that of the Lavender Lady, believed to be William Jr.'s wife, Lillian. Known for her love of the color lavender, her presence is often accompanied by the faint scent of her favorite perfume. Shadow figures are frequently seen darting down hallways, and several guests have claimed to feel an icy hand touch their shoulder, only to turn and find no one there. Perhaps the most unsettling story involves the attic. It's said that William Jr. kept a child with deformities, a so-called monkey-faced boy, hidden away in the attic to avoid scandal. To this day, people report hearing soft cries and the sound of small feet running across the floor, despite the attic being empty. So what could explain the hauntings at the Lemp Mansion? Some argue that the mansion's tragic history has left an indelible mark on the building, creating a sort of psychic residue. Others believe the stories are exaggerated, fueled by the human tendency to find patterns and assign meaning to unexplained phenomena. From a psychological perspective, the power of suggestion can't be ignored. Knowing the mansion's dark history primes visitors to experience fear and unease, making them more likely to interpret ordinary occurrences as supernatural. Skeptics also point to the mansion's age, noting that creaking floors, drafts, and faulty wiring can easily be mistaken for ghostly activity. But for those who've experienced the unexplainable firsthand, no amount of skepticism can erase what they've seen and felt. Whether it's the restless spirits of the Lemp family or simply the echoes of a tragic past, the Lemp Mansion remains one of America's most haunted locations. And if you're brave enough to visit, just remember, not all the residents have left.